You're watching the DSP Leaders Summit on Open RAN, which looks at the increasing importance of the open virtualized radio access network. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content at TelecomTV, and today's panel discussion looks at the role of Open RAN in mature mobile markets. Now, there's been a lot of focus on Open RAN in greenfield scenarios by new entrant telcos, but is there a viable business case for operators who already have large established networks? How can Open RAN be effectively deployed in these mature mobile markets? Well, before we discuss these issues, let me first introduce our panelists. And joining us from Dallas, Texas is Igal Elbaz, who is SVP Wireless and Access Technology with AT&T. From Pennsylvania, we welcome back Bill Stone, VP of Network Planning with Verizon. From Germany, we are joined by Franz Seiser, who is VP of Access Disaggregation with Deutsche Telekom. And joining us from California is Sachin Katti, who is co-chair of the Technical Steering Committee of the O-RAN Alliance and Advisor for Strategy at VMware. Hello everybody, and very good to see you. Now, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of interest around new entrants and their use of Open RAN. You know, the likes of Rakuten and Dish are getting a lot of attention right now, and they've been explaining the commercial logic behind their decisions. But why would an operator with an established mobile network, with a massive installed base, and we've got 3 such telcos with us today, why would they consider deploying Open RAN? Igal, let me start with you.
Sure, thank you. So to start, I think it's important to note that O-RAN is flexible enough to allow us to deploy or bring in portion of O-RAN while keeping our existing vendor solutions in place. But with that, there's additional values of reason why to introduce Open RAN into established network. One of them is something like common operation. So if you think about our network, we have multiple vendors in our network. Each one of them typically has its own EMS and different way of doing the operation management. Things like an open interface like the O1 can actually allow us to have a common data model that can feed into a one OSS and BSS system that we use internally. And as a result of this, to really simplify the way we operate the network. And in addition to that, you actually can bring external develop or internal develop automation capabilities or AI and machine learning that actually can improve that. So that's one reason. Another reason is that many of us are in the process of migrating or transition to 5G or modernizing the network. So there's always a point of time where you insert more new hardware into the network. Something like an open frontal is absolutely a capability for us that we can leverage to introduce a growing number of vendors into our network. A third reason would be think about the complexities of the network. You know, each one of us has a different network, a different spectrum position, different structure of the network, different customer profiles. And as we transition into 5G, the level of complexity is growing. You know, we introduce new spectrum. We're moving into things like dynamic spectrum sharing, massive IoT. The ability to manage and being able to tune the network and customize it to the benefit of our customers is getting more and more complicated. So think about introducing AI and machine learning on top of an AI interface really opens up a lot of capabilities in terms of network efficiency. So just to summarize, again, we're seeing benefits both from an operational perspective, network efficiency, cost management, as well as the ability to introduce new services and create new revenues.
Thank you, Igal. And Bill, what's your rationale for looking at Open RAN?
Sure, and very similar to Igal, but just building on that a little bit, upgrading and evolving networks is something that we're continuously doing, and that's certainly true right now. We're far along with a multi-year process to virtualize the network functions in our core network. As Igal just mentioned, we're in the process in the RAN of performing the upgrades to 5G. We're also deploying compute resources in the RAN for the virtualization of the baseband functions, as well as to enable single-digit latencies for 5G for MEC applications and latency-sensitive applications. So all of that ongoing activity in the RAN enables us to very naturally incorporate Open RAN into the evolution process. And just highlighting a couple reasons, Igal covered most, but top of mind for us is Open RAN fosters innovation in the vendor ecosystem. And the flexibility that Open RAN provides us gives us the ability to deploy the best-in-class capabilities that innovation enables in the vendor, or it enables us to take advantage of that innovation in the vendor ecosystem. So that's all important to an operator such as Verizon, because we want to continue to improve our network performance and continue to improve customer experience.
Thank you, Bill. And Franz, Deutsche Telekom is a big supporter also of Open RAN. What's your rationale for looking to adopt this technology?
Yeah, so coming back to your question, and as you just heard all the benefits, my natural reaction would be, why not? There is not one single reason why we would not want to make use and enjoy all the benefits that have been mentioned already. We need to upgrade our radio infrastructure from time to time anyhow, because new technologies are coming, additional spectrum is made available. We need to deliver also, not the least, on targets like power efficiency, as radio, of course, also is very critical in our CO2 emission thing. So there is a lot of reason to always, whenever you put in new gear in your network, to be sure you use the latest and greatest technology and you are as future-proof as possible. And at this point in time, as you said, we are very much behind. We are very convinced that Open RAN provides us so many benefits, also in the mid and long term, when we talk about transforming radio into a programmable platform, where you can put small applications on top that control the behavior of the network, that may be extremely interested in certain deployment cases, to much more tailor the behavior of the radio to your customer need. So the amount that the benefits are tremendous. Yes, of course, we need to spend quite some effort. It goes together with some change on how we are running the networks. As you don't get everything from one supplier, it also means changes and responsibilities, but we are deeply convinced the benefits by far outweigh the efforts we need to take.
Thank you. And Sachin, as our neutral panelist here today, as Franz says, why not? Why shouldn't the established operators enjoy the benefits that Open RAN promises?
Yes, I think I'll take the perspective of from ORAN, and just as a neutral observer, how I would structure this. And I think I'll put it well, actually, which is that ORAN gives you a lot of flexibility in introducing this technology with varying levels of benefit. And so the way I'd structure it is ORAN is promoting 4 kinds of disaggregation. I'll classify it as radio disaggregation, compute disaggregation, management plane disaggregation, and then control plane disaggregation. And I've intentionally ordered it in that manner because that's, I believe, how the sequence of introducing Open RAN will happen in mature markets, which is radio disaggregation is related to the open fronthaul that Igal and Bill mentioned, and gives even established operators a lot of choice in what kind of radio units to use from a variety of vendors. Compute disaggregation, as Bill mentioned, and Igal did too, allows an operator to build a consistent infrastructure from the core to the radio. You can buy compute servers from the same or different vendors and cloudify it, and then basically manage the end-to-end network as a cloud service on top. And these two are things you can do today, even if the rest of the things have not happened, rest of the opening up has not happened. And then management plane disaggregation really takes advantage of interfaces like O1 that Igal mentioned to give you a consistent operational layer that's multi-vendor and vendor neutral, and allows you to automate and bring new services faster to market. And finally, the most aggressive one is going to be control plane disaggregation that decouples a lot of the intelligence and allows you to innovate on new spectral efficiency technology. So the theme really here is choice as well as increased agility in introducing innovation. So absolutely no reason, but I think in terms of practically how we would execute on it, this would be the sequence. I think this is going to happen.
Thank you. Let's move on to the challenges, because there's bound to be challenges associated with interoperability with the existing RAN. You know, these can't be run as separate networks. And Igal, you mentioned earlier about common operations. Perhaps you can expand upon that theme.
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, we should give credit to our vendor and supplier community. For years, they built very sophisticated integrated systems. So, France, Bill, ourselves, between Verizon, Deutsche, AT&T, we are serving millions of customers, very sophisticated network, high demand for capacity. And those integrated systems worked very well. So I think the main challenge is the understanding that once you start to disaggregate those systems, what is the level of integration you need to put in place in order for you to be getting the same capabilities out of the system. So to me, that's the number one challenge. I think it's doable, but we should be mindful of this. And just to provide some perspective on this, there's a perception that new operators that comes in, it might be easier for them to leverage open network or open RAN. I will tell you that we established operator that build established network. I would argue that we have some advantage because this is what we're doing for years. We're introducing and advancing our network. We took it from 2G to 3G and from 3G to 4G and now to 5G. This is our business. We're keeping modernizing our business. We're keeping adding capabilities. So I think for us to be able to introduce Open RAN capabilities into the network would be easier over time, specifically if it's supported by 3GPP. So definitely, I see the value of this. I understand the challenge, but you mentioned this operational management and improvement and this common operation. Going back to that example, having an interface like an O1 and allowing us to have one view across the network and across the various suppliers and vendors is a huge advantage for us. So with all of the challenges that might come with introducing open capabilities into the network, the benefits are so high that it's absolutely something that we're going to be rising into the challenge and try to mitigate them and bring them and introduce them to the network.
Franz, you look after access disaggregation at Deutsche Telekom. What are the challenges that you are faced with?
Very much in line what we just heard. So it's, of course, looking from operational perspective, what we see is today we have the big suppliers. They deliver a fully integrated network, including management systems. And the job we typically do, and of course I simplify now quite a bit, is we integrate that one into our OSS and BSS systems. But we know there is this supplier and they take care, the whole thing works end to end. Now that of course fundamentally changes, even if you only take the first step and you separate the radio unit from the baseband. Already the question is who is now in charge, how are the management systems working together. So I would probably order it a little bit different than Sachin. I would put the open management second after the disaggregation of the radio, as we believe we need to go into this separate management platform from the one to be able to manage these components independently. And of course, that leads to a situation, that's our current thinking, that we as operator need to take much more responsibility on our side to make sure these things work together properly and deliver in the end in front of the customer. And that means to learn how to integrate these pieces and the models that are representing these pieces in the management system so we can work these things together. The good thing is, and that's again, I think, a bit of a benefit for companies like the ones here, we already do learn about that for quite some time, as the whole journey started already years ago. Back then we called it network function virtualization. This is when we started to move into the cloud, to integrate different pieces on software level, and radio disaggregation is to some extent moving that now out to the access and practicing that also on the access side. But one of the key challenges really is, from my perspective, change of responsibilities and the need from us, from the operators, to really take more responsibility. But it also means getting much more control about what's happening, which players we bring in, what are the capabilities, how do we combine them to build services for the customers, and these type of things.
Bill, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I'll just add a couple comments. It's already been covered extremely well by my colleagues here, but just emphasizing a point that was made by, I believe, by Egal, and Franz, you may have followed up on it as well. Our operations teams are now highly experienced at maintaining and operating multi-vendor environments that exist in the core today. So we're expecting that we'll be able to come up to speed and ramp up quickly so that we can manage multi-vendor RAN as well. Now, the other thing I wanted to emphasize is that there's a heavy dependency, and it's very important to have well-defined, standardized architecture and interfaces. The better they're defined, and ORAN is doing a great job here. We're all making significant contributions to that effort in ORAN, but the better the definition of the, or the more clearly the architecture and the interfaces are defined, and you follow that up with plug fests, lab testing, the better that's defined, the more smoothly the multi-vendor deployments will go.
Great. Well, Sachin, perhaps we can ask you to follow up on this one. You know, how is work progressing at the ORAN Alliance on the technical side?
Oh, I think a lot of the challenges that have been talked about today are being recognized, and we're putting in place efforts to address this. And so I'll start first, acknowledge kind of all the points that have been made, which is that when we go to Open RAN and disaggregation, you're going from the proverbial one neck to choke to multiple necks to choke. And so how do you actually figure out what's responsible when things go wrong? And so cannot emphasize enough the need for a modern operational layer that is vendor neutral and that has very well defined standardized interfaces, which allows you to look across the radio vendor, the compute and the infrastructure vendor and the RAN vendor and figure out kind of where things are going wrong. Right. So in that context, I think ORAN is building reference designs as part of an open source effort. It is hosting what's called the OTIC, which is the integration center. So different vendors' implementations can come in and be tested for interoperability, as well as make it easier for smaller vendors to get that kind of interoperability testing done, which is extremely hard today because they don't have the ability to go and test with the big vendors' equipment otherwise. Right? And finally, as Bill mentioned, PlugFest, where we can actually have showcases and results of such interoperability testing. Right? So it's almost like a hackathon kind of feel. We are trying to increase the pace at which these new things get tested, and it's okay if things break. Right? That's the whole point. We want to learn as quickly as possible so we can iterate. And so I think those are the things that are happening. I'll just add one last comment. I think this is an opportunity for the industry to have a more modern take on system integration. Right? So we've done system integration in a manner for the last few decades. But I think as we open it up, as we have common data models, as we have these open interfaces, I think we can learn from the cloud industry, from the software industry, which has invented a lot of CI/CD tooling to be able to do integration and testing of different services. Most modern services are built by putting together software from different components, right? And we rely on those services every single day. So I think we have an opportunity to take advantage of all of that technology and bring that to the RAN. And that would probably create kind of a more modern system integrator. And the operator could be one, could be someone else. But I think that's an opportunity for the whole industry.
Thank you. Yeah, good point. Now, we're aware of the challenges and we're hoping that the challenges will get easy over time, but how are we actually doing? Are there any successful case studies that we can identify, any successful implementations, any best practices that we're coming up with? Igal, perhaps you can kick this round off.
Yeah, sure. So I think both Bill and Sachin mentioned PlugFest and some of the demos that carriers and suppliers are doing. And I think many of the audience can watch them at the Global Showcase ORAN website. So there's a lot of press releases and work that has been done and started to be demonstrated. On our side, in AT&T, we've partnered with Nokia to do some tests around our near real-time RIC controller. We've introduced a couple of X apps that are looking on collecting measurement for neighbor relationship over an E2 interface on a commercial network in New York. That ends up to be really successful in terms of what we could learn out of this trial. Clearly, there's other things that we are involved in during 2020. We're looking around closed loop automation and analytics and other stuff over different interfaces that we're going to be able to share over time. In terms of best practices, again, I think it's really early to talk about best practices. I think it's first practices or early practices in terms of what are we seeing. I think France was who mentioned that we have a lot of experience in terms of virtualization and disaggregation in other parts of the network, and I think we're bringing a lot of that knowledge now into the RAN.
Great. And Bill, any early learnings from yourself?
Sure, a couple things I'll just mention. Two use cases or proof points for the concept of Open RAN. One, we have deployed radios with basebands from different networks, not at scale, but we've successfully done that. It's certainly more challenging without the well-standardized interfaces, but we've been able to work through that. So I think that's a good proof point for the mix and match of radio and baseband use case. Another use case I'll mention is we've deployed a self-optimizing network or SON platform from a vendor that is vendor agnostic, meaning we have one SON platform that is being used across multiple RAN vendors. That came in particularly useful during COVID when traffic patterns were shifting with work from home and whatnot. So I think that's another good proof point for the use case of the RAN intelligent controller. In terms of best practices, I agree it's very early in the process, but two things we learned from those use cases. One, software release management is really important. Lining up your software releases with similar capabilities, making sure the vendors, when you're in a multi-vendor environment, are collaborating with us and collaborating with each other to ensure that they're going to communicate between themselves in the same way. Obviously, a well-standardized interface from Open RAN will help with that. The other thing is there are problems discovered. So rapid software deployment, rapid software development, the CI/CD process, that is certainly helpful to have that in place as you move into the Open RAN environment.
Great. And Franz, are there any early findings that you can share with the community?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of things have been mentioned already. Fully agree. It's still early days, but we just recently had this big OTIC Platfest worldwide with, I think, pretty impressive results and quite a lot of companies. I think there is a lot going on in the labs of all of us here in the call and even more. What we also see is we see a lot of companies creating an interest, starting to investigating, and we also have signs that we will see some more companies coming into that space that you may not think about in the first place. A bit too early to share, but I think there will be a couple of announcements soon. I think there also have been some big moves on the semiconductor side recently. If you look at it, again, had something to do with accelerators, so again, very close to radio. I personally believe next year will be the big year of announcements regarding Open RAN and trials, and probably even more than trials, some first field deployments and things. I'm really curious, looking forward. I think mid of next year we will be in a very different situation compared to today, because the pace of development we see, products now which have been on the roadmap now being delivered, some first things we have in our hand we really can work with. The speed of delivery of these things is really increasing quite tremendously.
Indeed, it's going to be a very busy coming 12 months. Sachin, what are you finding at the moment from when we start to see first deployments and first shipments of equipment? Any lessons learnt yet? And any good practices we can see?
Yeah, and I'll actually key in on what Bill was also alluding to. I think from what I see in places like Dish, the whole CI/CD pipeline is a critical part of this because deployment of Open RAN is not a traditional thing where an operator goes and buys equipment or software and then just deploys it. It's actually almost a design partnership at this stage, and it will continue to be for the next 2 to 3 years. So increasing the agility as well as transparency of getting software releases from different vendors as well as hardware, of course, in the RU case, and being able to continuously test in an automated manner and having the results of these tests be transparent to all of the vendors as well as the operator is the way you actually scale this, right? Because I think that's how we are going to learn what's going to break and be able to quickly iterate. So we need to break the more traditional way of doing things, which is you get a very fully baked thing once every 6 months and then you put it in a lab and test it. That won't be fast enough. So you kind of need to a more modern continuous testing process. So I think the biggest lesson from my perspective is need to adopt that CI/CD mindset where you're basically running a nightly set of tests almost, and you get a dashboard that is automatically populated with what's working, what's not working when we're putting all of these components together. And your operational team is also learning while they're doing this how to actually scale the deployment and management of an Open RAN network.
Franz.
Yeah, let me, this really is a good one. Let me build on that. Because one thing to share, I said we have this OTIC lab also here in Germany. And one thing that struck my mind a little bit when we had the opening ceremony, I had the pleasure to have a panel discussion with some of our senior guys, and it was about Open RAN. But guess what? For half an hour, we have only been talking about automation, test automation, software introduction, these kind of things. So it's already happening, this kind of mindset shift, and that really makes me positive that we managed to take the learnings we have taken over the last couple of years more on this more central pieces to introduce that to radio and having this experience, even though we talked about radio, we talked software all the time. That was really a very good experience from my perspective. And that's exactly what's happening. Yeah? Yes, of course, it's access, but the secret sauce, so to say, is much more on the software and automation side, because this will change the game with all the speed of upgrade, more regular, being able to react much faster. I think that's the key to ORAN, of which is not possible in today's environment.
Igal.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, I think it's really important to understand, and I think this is what's great about the way ORAN is developing. ORAN is not one thing, or Open RAN is not one thing. Even if you look at the ORAN Alliance specifically, I think there's already like 9 or 10 working group. And what I mean by this is that, different parts of openness will show up in different time, and they have different level of maturity. And that allows us, to me, if there's a good lesson learned from all of this, is that it's not 0 or 1, or you just don't push a button and replace. It's going to be a gradual change. And the fact that the ecosystem is maturing in different phases in different areas allows us to start testing and deploying different part of the openness at different time and different parts of the network. So I think it's really important that we all understand it's not, nothing happens all at the same time. Different level of complexities will mature at different times. And I think that gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of how we introduce it into the network.
Okay, good point. And I'd like to build on that for a final question. Bill, let me start with you. Is there any value in replacing proprietary RAN infrastructure or parts of it or segments of it with Open RAN before this existing kit has reached its end of life?
Yeah, some of that depends on how you define end of life, Guy. As I said in the opening remarks, we're continuously going through upgrades and evolving the network. And we do that to take advantage of new capabilities. There's certainly best-in-class capabilities that are being fostered as a part of this new Open RAN environment we're moving into. We're seeing great participation from tier 1 vendors, tier 2 vendors as well. So I guess I would say absolutely yes, although I don't necessarily think of the old closed RAN system as necessarily being end of life so much as building on what Igal was just saying. This new Open RAN environment gives us a great deal of flexibility. And at the same time, we're bringing in other capabilities such as the compute at the edge, which enables us to virtualize the BBU functions, new radios that support 5G. So it's a great time to be migrating to Open RAN.
Great. And Igal, leaving aside the geopolitics of the RAN and replacing kit, if we focus on the performance and the business case for operators, are you saying that we could speed up and accelerate the introduction of parts of this?
Yes, I think, again, as long as you understand that it comes in phases and you can use different, by the way, not all of us are going to use all of parts of Open RAN, even over time. Some of us might standardize over Open Frontal or an O1 interface or an A1 interface. Others might be more interested in white boxes, radios. So I think different operators will have different phases and different way of looking at the problem. And I think as long as the specification are ready and the vendor and the supplier ecosystems are joining this, there's no reason for us not to accelerate. But to the question that you posed before that, I don't think there's a single reason or decision when you decide to change equipment. You always need to ask yourself, what is the additional gain that you get from that replacement? What's the complexity of doing this? Do you need to climb a tower? Do you need to climb a tower for another reason that you can add that? So there's all kind of motivations for replacing. And again, to my previous point, the fact that it's flexible and allows us to tackle different problems at different times allows us to accelerate in some areas while we take the time in other areas.
And Franz, does the disaggregated and flexible nature of Open RAN lead to a kind of a rethinking about how you go about upgrading and replacing your RAN equipment?
Yes, of course. I mean, there are two different things. The one is how you introduce the new technology, and second, of course, once you have it, how do you make use of all these software-based tools and capabilities. And for introducing, of course, as you have to be very careful and think about, because I mean, radio is by far the biggest cost block for all of us, simply by the sheer number of sites. So of course, once you have upgraded, which you need to do anyhow from time to time due to equipment lifetime, you want to make sure you don't need to revisit that site a few months later because you want to do something else. So that the more you can do later on via software, the better it is. It has also to fit cost-wise, energy-wise. Of course, we will when you introduce it, it has to be competitive. So finding the right time, the right deployment model, because not all of our sites are the same. There are quite some differences regarding capacity, regarding connectivity, you name it. So there is quite a range of different conditions, and you really need to be careful when you introduce it in order to make sure that this is not killing your cost base going forward. And that's probably also one of the things where we as established players are in a little bit of a different situation than a greenfield, because we have a network out there, we have a certain customer experience out there, and that's typically rather high. Of course, we want to keep that, and at the same time also make sure our cost base is staying at the right level and getting better every time. So that's of course one of the things, and that depends a lot on the maturity of the product. So it's all a question, when is the right point in time to make that move. In some areas it may be very early, in others there's probably still a bit more work required.
And Sachin, any final thoughts about how and where operators could introduce Open RAN into their networks?
I think as Franz is saying, there's many different places where you may make different choices. Even though you might be introducing Open RAN, you might be introducing it in different configurations. So I'd break it down as following. So I think in most of the places, you will try to do the radio open fronthaul. So try and replace your radios when you're climbing towers anyway, as Igal said. Might as well do it so that you replace the radio hardware with something that is interoperable. And because one of the big benefits is if you have something on the top of on the cell tower that is interoperable, then you reduce the rest of the Open RAN problem to a software problem, right? Because that's the most expensive operational thing you can do. So I think that's where I think about kind of where I would take opportunities where I'm going to the tower anyway. Now, in terms of where else, what are kind of surgical opportunities where you introduce Open RAN? A few things come to mind. So as C-band comes along and you're rolling out new 5G capabilities, that's a new spectrum. That's an opportunity to introduce a new architecture, right? So both on the open fronthaul as well as virtualized kind of implementations with open interfaces. Second, another opportunity is on indoor kind of private deployments that the operator might be extending and deploying for enterprises. So that's another playground where you can start with this, learn how to scale this, and then translate that to the macro. And for all of these, I'd say the operational layer, you can start introducing even today, even if you don't do anything else underneath the infrastructure, which is building a multi-vendor operational layer. It's feasible today, even though the interfaces might be proprietary, it will get easier as interfaces become more open. So I think that's actually the good thing about ORAN is there's so many paths you can take. They need not all be the same path. Every operator can choose their own paths to get to that eventual end state. And I think it depends on the specifics of the environment each operator is operating in.
Well, that is all the time we have for this panel, unfortunately. Thank you all very much for taking part in our discussion today. Terrific to hear all your views. Now, if you haven't already done so, please make sure you watch our other panel discussions, as well as our series of keynote interviews with my colleague Ray Lemaitre. And don't forget to join us for our live Q&A programme, which is scheduled for 4:30 p.m. UK time today. And this is your chance to quiz our guests and panellists and to air your views on Open RAN. You can send in your questions using the form right here on the website. For now though, thank you very much for watching and goodbye.